obviously, as I was reading the book, a big concept I feel that kind of I don't know what to call it, revolutionized your thinking, let's say, as an individual, was the Freudian. Although you mentioned it's initially introduced by Sabina Spielrein, is that right? The idea of
Another Russian. Well, I claim that she's Ukrainian, so it's also
the
problematic.
controversial.
Spielrein.
Yeah, interesting. I knew of her not because of any Lacan of Freud, but she worked with Carl Jung, I believe, and
She worked with Jung and she worked with Freud, and she was the one who introduced the concept of a death drive. And it was well known; it was associated with her initially, and then the thread was lost. And now we mostly associate Freud with the concept of a death drive, which is unfair. And if I may, this book is amazing in explaining
excellent.
Sabina Spielrein, the woman and the myth.
Oh,
It's
thank you for that.
doing justice to Sabina Spielrein, um, restoring her as the one who introduced not only the concept of a death drive, but more importantly, maybe the idea of unconscious structures of psyche, which Jung then takes and kind of elaborates in a bit different direction. I like her versions of both important concepts for psychoanalysis more.
Yeah, excellent. Oh, thank you for that. I'll leave a link to that in the description down below. In fact, before reading or like following your work, I had no idea who she was, except, and I'm sorry, it's a bit chauvinistic, except that she had a relationship with, like an intimate relationship with Carl Jung. That's all I knew about her, but I didn't really know any of her intellectual work. So yeah, back to the death drive. How can I articulate this question? It's obviously when I first came across it, I thought the death drive was this sort of drive within us to for death, for destruction, or like a kind of like what Ernest Becker would put, but in the other way, that we all have this need to die. But then the more I've studied Zizek's work, Alan Kazupanchik's work, who I know influenced you a lot, and then obviously your work, uh, it's more like a drive for being undead, as you would call it. So if I could ask for a neophyte, for a person who isn't read in psychoanalytic theory or literature like yourself, how would you explain the concept of the death drive? And then perhaps you could, if you don't mind, expand on how you radicalized it in your book.
So I really love the concept. I mean, it's one of the few concepts in psychoanalysis that I can tolerate, that I can feel I can use, um, that I don't hate yet, at least. But in some interpretations, like the way Freud conceptualizes it, is the problem with the Freud and how it changes Freud comprehension of psychoanalysis and of human psyche. Because initially, he only adopted it in his late theory after 1920, and he takes it from Sabina Spielrein in like with some combination with Schopenhauer, but it functions as a curse of psychoanalysis because initial Freudian comprehension of a human, it was based on idea of pleasure principle, like utilitarian comprehension of human being. What we want is pleasure. What we are striving towards is pleasure. And then he changed his mind and he tries to make the concept of a death drive central. He would even claim that this is central, providing multiple comprehensions way of conceptualizing the death drive. But each time, and critics of Freud would say that he keeps coming back to his initial framework. So it's like he exists in contradiction. This is how Sabina Spielrein curses psychoanalysis, with her concept introducing something that is foreign to it. And after this, the practical psychoanalysis practice, which was based on initial comprehension of human psyche, Freudian comprehension of human psyche, we can say positively oriented, wanting be happy, wanting to be alive, or at least like aiming at survival. And this comprehension, you cannot change. You have to change completely everything in psychoanalysis, in Freudian early psychoanalysis, to accept it. And he wasn't able to do it. So it kind of um, interestingly stumbles upon this concept. And I would, maybe it's not that I radicalize it, maybe I do, but rather I try to come back to initial interpretation of Sabina Spielrein, or at least my reading of her, because this is what she starts with. It's the other way around. If Freud starts with the opposite, she starts with this concept and introduces it. And one of the problems in Freud comprehension, why it doesn't fit into his comprehension of human psyche, because he starts with subject, like a subject, isolated, self-enclosed, and is driven by its desires. Even concept of the death drive is problematic because it drives somewhere. It's like desire that belongs to a subject. And it's hard, but quite hard to include the idea of that you want self-destruction or something like a death drive into this initial framework, because like doesn't fit. If you already have the idea of a human being, you include it there. Okay, he included it as unconscious, and consciously we still want, in pursuit of pleasure, it's just unconsciously what is we really driven by is the death drive, but it's still like very weak, quite hard to redefine the initial version of a Freud to actually fit a death drive there as central. For Spielrein, it was different. Well, because I think she still talks with Freud. She uses his terms, and she talks with psychoanalysts, with him. But I think if she wouldn't talk with them, I think she would say something different, something that is more harder to make part of Freudian psychoanalysis, because she starts not with like the main thing for her is the dimension of we, not dimension of individual. It's like intersubjective dimension. This is where she positions the death drive. Death drive it's not about survival. It doesn't care about the individual. It's the space maybe of something where the boundaries between people dissolve. And this is why for her it's easier to reconciliate, to even equate love and death drive, because for Freud it's impossible. Okay, you have, and because Freud starts with male, like male human being with driven by sexuality or something like it, and sexuality is reappropriating something to satisfy your need outside of yourself. That's maybe it's simplified, but it's basic model. And with Sabina Spielrein, it's not that there is a subject with desires and who wants to satisfy their needs. It's different. It's not the desire. It's rather something from outside of you that is not in control, that is calling you, maybe like a death drive, doesn't care about you. And it's not about reappropriation of something outside of you. For Freud, then the aggression would be associated more with the death drive, trying to appropriate object outside of you, like female object or something, to satisfy your desire. In Spielrein, and maybe female-centered model would be different. It's not you, then you have desire and you satisfying your desires. Like completely different. There is no you, and there is no desire. There is like more process of internal sacrifice, the absence where self dissolves into something bigger than you that doesn't care about you. And that's the death drive. And love here would be the sacrifice, not the desire to satisfy something, to use something or make something part of yourself, to reappropriate. It's like different dynamics of, so Freud takes her concept and makes it his concept, which I like less than her initial version.
So, Dr. Reshe, if I could ask a very specific question, is it the social aspect outside of the individual or the subject, apropos the death drive, that differentiates it from a desire for death or non-existence? Pardon me.
Well, the desire for non-existence is can be seen as one of the interesting options how to interpret it. It's not necessarily different from the death drive. It could be seen as one of the ways how one can interpret the death drive. What is valuable for me maybe in Spielrein is that it's for her, it's intersubjective something. She doesn't start with self. In relation to self, it's rather self negation, or the disappearance of self, but also it's not opposite. It's not opposite to maybe generation of self, because self is generated through destruction or something like it, and it's intersubjective. It's where self dissolves, and it's also challenged to general perspective of subject in Western philosophy of subjectivity, self-centered philosophy, which starts with self, the interest of self, the existence of self, the sovereign self, and with existentialism, you need to become authentic self, like very good, successful self, um, sovereign self. And this perspective, this obsession with self, and recently, not recently, but quite for a while, this kind of orientation when one begins with self, separated from other, was questioned in feminist philosophy, for example. It's not the self. Self is interrelational. It depends on others. It exists in relation with others. Uh, it's rather illusionary formation. It's not solid. It's not indestructible, something like this. And her concept, Sabina Spielrein concept of a death drive, captures this better, the intersubjectivity, the illusionary nature of self. And it's a bit different from traditional Western philosophical accent on the need to transcend self, something like it, to from and improve it, or like boost self-esteem or something like it. It's different orientation. It's not about it. It's more like self is not important. It's not. It's different direction even of thinking.
How would this differ from like a very crass version of, let's say, like Eastern philosophy, like Buddhism, or whatnot, which I know like Khan had an interest in too. This idea of, having to sort of let go of the self and let the ego disappear, and the idea that we kind of come into like non-existence. How would what Sabina is articulating, I can't pronounce her surname, what she's articulating different from kind of this Eastern philosophical, again, but probably a bit caricatured idea of letting go of the self, or ego transcendence, so to speak.
I don't know how it's different from Buddhism, because I'm not really into Buddhism enough to judge. But one can say that the concept of a death drive, because it's partially influenced by Schopenhauer too, which Freud admits he's more eagerly talking about Schopenhauer than Spielrein. And one could say that the death drive, therefore, is, and because Schopenhauer is influenced, it's westernized version, one of the first one of Buddhism. And because influencing Freud is the results in the death drive partially from him. We can say that this is also the death drive is kind of Buddhist thing, westernized. And my problem is rather with the westernized Eastern philosophy, precisely Buddhism. And I saw meme a while ago which says, I renounced my ego, now I'm better than others. Like, for me, this is the version. Okay, renouncing ego, it's still, there is a path. That's Western thing. There is a certain way that you need to do, to improve yourself. And like adopting Buddhism, I think it just makes it a part of itself. So it just doesn't work. I hope that Buddhism is not something that encourages it. I hope it's corrupted version, the Western version, but it captures in a great way what is wrong with it. It's not that there is a call, teaching or answer what human being has to do. Like, we have a task on this earth, and a task is, for example, to renounce your ego. It just doesn't matter, more or less. It's not, when it starts to matter, well, when it's included in a Western philosophy, it works in all this Western framework of psychology. It starts to work in this way. I need to do it, and then I feel superior to others, or I just feel good about myself. I don't think it's it doesn't matter from Spielrein's perspective. It's not what you have to do. It's just, there is nothing you have to do, rather.